Our first reading is from the essay, We Need Progressive Religion by Sarah Robinson, writing for Salon.com. Religion has been central to the formation of human communities and to how we approach the future. For as long as Homo sapiens has been around, apart from God belief, which varies widely between religions, all successful religions thrive and endure because they offer their adherents a variety of effective community building, social activism, and change management tools that, taken together, make religion quite possibly the most powerful social change technology humans have ever developed. What does religion offer that progressives need to make our movement work? First, there's nothing like it if you want to bond a bunch of very diverse people into a tight community of shared meaning and values. A religious congregation brings together people of all ages, backgrounds, educational levels, professional rank, and life circumstances, and melds them into an enduring tribe that's centered around a shared commitment commitment to mutual trust and care, and most importantly, has a clear and vivid shared vision of the future they're trying to create. There is simply no other organizational form that encourages people to share their time, energy, and resources so quickly, completely, or enduringly, or aligns so much conviction toward the same goal. Today's next reading and sermon will be delivered by our minister, Charley R.
Thank you, Marianne. I'm so grateful to be here today at the end of a week that for me has been very trying. I know that for some of you it has, for reasons that may be mundane, like the end of the holiday season and returning to work or whatever activities in your life that you do before a holiday would happen. I want to read, well, today I've chosen the title, The Crisis of Progressive Religion, today. And I did not know what would be happening the week prior to giving this sermon. And like other ministers before me, I thought about completely rewriting it, even avoiding the title altogether and talking about something like justice or resistance. But then I realized that in talking about progressive religion, in talking about, in particular, how the crisis of progressive religion affects our congregation in ways that we can begin to try and unite ourselves ever stronger, I realized I'd actually picked a very appropriate theme. So the reading I'm going to offer at this time is called It's Hard Work by Rosemary Bray McNatt. And the Reverend Rosemary Bray McNatt is president of Starr King School for the Ministry and a contributing editor of the UU World magazine. And she is the author of Unafraid of the Dark, a memoir. It's hard work. Why are we still talking about inclusivity and diversity when we have done so little to make them real? Why are we still looking pained about the lack of diversity in the denomination? Because diversity, inclusivity is terribly hard, terribly uncomfortable, definitely unsettling, and often quite frustrating. What I know about being inclusive, crossing from culture to culture, learning the language of diversity is that it's the work of a lifetime. It's hard to accept people who are not like you, who don't talk the way you do, or believe the things you believe, or dress or vote as you do. It's even harder to appreciate them for the things about them that are not like you, to find them interesting and fun, to enjoy the learning that's part of the experience, and to acknowledge finally that you may have to agree to disagree. The truth is this: if there is no justice, there will be no peace. We can read Thoreau and Emerson to one another, quote Rilke and Alice Walker and Howard Thurman, and think good and noble thoughts about ourselves. But if we cannot bring justice into the small circle of our own individual lives, we cannot hope to bring justice to the world. And if we do not bring justice to the world, none of us is safe. None of us will survive. Nothing that Unitarian Universalists need to do is more important than making justice real here where we are. Hard as diversity is, it is our most important task. I'd like you to join me in a moment of silence, remembering again that within us is all the wisdom and the courage, all the passion and the beauty that we need to begin to make the world a better place. Please join me. As I witnessed the events of this past week, as I saw the Confederate flag flown within our Capitol building for the first time in our history, I was stunned, I was angered, even a little mystified, but also struck by the absurdity of what I was watching. Yes, at some points I had to laugh at the strangeness of it all. But then came the reports of the violence, the deaths, and the promise that yet again this motley movement, this mob action, was being planned to be repeated in the near future. And I was reminded that I actually come from origins not too distant from those who stormed the Capitol. Although my father considered himself a moderate, my brother is a bit more in sympathy with those who stormed the Capitol, who would do anything to prevent another Democrat from holding the office of president, or from the Democrats winning a majority in the Senate. I don't know that I would have ever become the kind of far-right extremist that the folks who undertook this action on Wednesday, because I had, even within the fundamentalism, the apocalypticism of the religion in which I was raised, I also believed that God was love and that it was God's will that humanity live in freedom, peace, and justice. And it was just that simple belief that I held on to as I began to question my faith as a young adult. And the voices and the people who helped me escape that community, that culture, were progressives of faith, and of course, occasionally progressives of non-faith, actually more often than occasionally, who helped me deconstruct all of that dark side of white Christian supremacy that I had been imbued with, and to begin to rebuild a new progressive faith. And I didn't do it alone. I did it with a community of people who had gone ahead of me, who had themselves escaped from a conservative, regressive religion and had found their way to a peacemaking, justice building way to live in the world. And sometimes it seems that progressive religion is, in fact, overpowered by the sheer number and the sheer wealth and the sheer might of some of these regressive forces. And we do know that in World War II, such a regressive political power came close to conquering most of Europe. And it was only pushed back by the collaboration between the United States and the Soviet Union to say, we will not let this win. And I feel, and I believe actually with all my heart, that despite the bad news that I'm going to talk about in a moment here, there is good news, there is hope. I believe we could be on the cusp of a great flowering of progressive religion in the United States, despite. But I'm going to tell you now about the statistics, which you may have seen in the description of this sermon. The Unitarian Universalist Association, with which we are affiliated, peaked in 1968 with 1,135 congregations, and we had 431 adult members on our rolls. In 2020, that number has decreased to 1,027 congregations and 921 adult members. And in that same period, the US population has grown by nearly 29 million. And I was confronted with this fact as I began to move towards ministry. I felt a calling. I felt a calling since I was a young child to be a minister. But because of this deconstruction process that I had to go to, I knew I wasn't ready. And when I finally knew I was ready, it was almost as if the opportunity for progressive religion to change the culture of the United States, to make an impact on injustices around the world, that moment had passed because these statistics, and let me tell you, these are actually not as bad as statistics in other denominations like the United Church of Christ or the Quakers or the Methodists for that matter. We're actually doing better than many of our liberal Protestant allies. And so I was struggling with my optimism confronted by the facts. And then I remembered that there was something I'd heard long ago when I was deconstructing and reconstructing. It says faith is not rejecting the facts, but it's embracing the facts and then making the fact change. And that just sums up my hope that we don't have to accept the downward slide. And part of my hope is because I, as someone who grew up in a religion that at least some significant portion of the faith community that I grew up in totally affirmed what was happening this week on Wednesday. And if I can escape, and I know literally thousands of former Pentecostals, former fundamentalists who have escaped and who are rebuilding their lives on a different basis of faith. Many of them find their ways into UU congregations, United Church of Christ, the Episcopal Church. They find their way, but others, and this is what's been going on, this is perhaps one part of the decline, others of them just become none of the above. A few years ago, this none of the above statistic, which was growing faster than adherence to Christianity, that the number of atheists had doubled in our society, and most of those atheists don't go to a UU church, although many of them actually do. And I just knew that there was a potential great body of people who could see the ugliness, the darkness, the fear, the hate that drives reactionary religion and escape from it. And so when I see a display like took place, and a tragedy and a calamity that took place this week, it's my faith and my knowledge that that event turned as many people away from reactionary thinking as it encouraged others to become more militant. It's not going to be easy to challenge the culture of reactionary religion, reactionary politics. It's never easy to do a really important task. I want to give an example of a Unitarian Universalist church which has broken the cycle, has stood against the stream of the decline that I just recounted for you. In Tulsa, Oklahoma, there's a church known as All Souls Unitarian Church of Tulsa, and it is the largest congregation within our entire denomination. During the 1990s, this period where we were losing at least two or three congregations a year, All Souls Tulsa grew to an average attendance of 6,000, an average attendance in the hundreds and membership in the thousands. And one key event that began to turn around and actually in a significant way boosted the membership of All Souls Church can be told through the story of Carlton Pearson, an African-American Pentecostal bishop. Yeah, the tradition I grew up in, although he was a bishop in the Church of God in Christ, the largest Pentecostal African-American denomination. And at one time, he was the pastor in Tulsa of the Higher Dimensions Evangelistic Center. And he was a protege of the well-known Oral Roberts and the founder of Oral Roberts University in Tulsa. And during the 90s, Carlton Pearson's church, Higher Dimensions, grew to an average attendance of over 6,000. And it was remarkably one of the most racially integrated churches in the entire country. It had a Black pastor, but it had a significant amount of white folks attending. It was not just appealing to African Americans. But something happened to him in the early 2000s. He had been a supporter of George Bush in 2000, but by 2004, his faith had begun to shift. And I don't know exactly all the details of that, but there is a film. If you go to Netflix, look for Come Sunday, and it recounts his journey from a conservative hellfire and brimstone theology to a theology of universal reconciliation and inclusion. He tells the story of watching a video that was recounting all the starvation and suffering in Africa, and he said, "There is no hell greater than this hell I'm seeing in front of me. These people are already living in a hell on earth. How can I preach hellfire after death anymore?" And he became a universalist. And first, it wasn't easy. It never, as I say, it is never easy to do an important task. His entire church of 6,000 dropped to under 100. Imagine this. This was a man who had followed the megachurch model, had devoted his life, and had begun to live the luxurious lifestyle that many of these megachurch and televangelists do, with big houses, big cars. He lost it all because he became convicted that he was preaching a message that was doing more harm than good. And when he began to preach the message that burned in his heart of universal love, universal reconciliation, he lost it all. He deliberately made the choice to stand for truth, and he's paid a great price. Carlton Pearson eventually merged the remaining Higher Dimensions congregation, which became renamed as New Dimensions, and merged them with All Souls Unitarian Church. Carlton Pearson said that the senior minister of All Souls was one of his most important people in reshaping his ministry around a message of love and inclusion. And as a result, he gave his congregation a few hundred people to All Souls, and then he took a position of ministry in Chicago. And that's how I actually personally met him several times, because I would attend his Sunday afternoon services. It was a church in growth or planting, and so they didn't want to compete with all the other churches, so they met on Sunday afternoon. And I met him several times. I actually had conversations with him about going into the ministry, because I believed, I knew that he was now connected to the Unitarian Universalist Association. He did eventually have to go back to Tulsa because his parents were aging and, beginning their last years of their lives. And so he joined the staff of All Souls in Tulsa. And the way All Souls Tulsa accommodated this new group of African-American, mostly African-American Christians who were also Universalists was they created a third service. All Souls, because it was so big, had two services. One that it called traditional, which was almost very much like what we do here every Sunday. But it also had a very strong, committed humanist group within its church, and they wanted to have a separate service, but on Sunday mornings, so that they would share the religious education, the musical resources, and so on of All Souls. And so they had two services, the traditional and the humanist. But then when the New Dimensions folks joined All Souls, they began a third service they called the contemporary service. And the music that they played and the themes that they lifted up in that service were more Christian, more African American. And what happened is that many of the folks who had been going to the traditional service started going to the contemporary service. Many of those folks weren't Christians, but they believed in supporting the work of creating a new form of Unitarian Universalism that New Dimensions represented. I tell that story because it's one of the things that reminds me, one, it is possible to be a Unitarian Universalist congregation and not keep losing members year after year. I don't claim to be as talented as Bishop Pearson or the other ministers at All Souls Church, but I aspire to be as effective as they can. And I'm not expecting Quincy Unitarian Church will ever be thousands of members. But if we look at our history, we have been bigger than we are now. Reminding us again of our Unitarian Universalist heritage, of our successes in the early part of the 20th century, where we grew to be over 1,100 congregations for our first time in history. It's not impossible. And even in our local context, we can make a difference. Because it's up to us. We get to write the next chapter of Quincy Unitarian history. We should invite into our midst folks who are younger, the millennials, Gen Z. We should reach out to folks who are LGBTQ+, because I have been assured by Taylor Wood that there is a thriving, if somewhat hidden, LGBTQ community there in Quincy. And of course, we need to reach out to Black, Indigenous, and other people of color. That sounds like a lot of work. But I think there is a way to enter into such a spirit of possibility of growth, even in the midst of this period of pandemic, because our online presence has grown tremendously during this period, and I believe we will continue to elevate our online presence. I work with Taylor and Lisa and others in your congregation to try and make such changes possible. So I want to challenge us all gently, and I need to hear this challenge, that Unitarian Universalism is good news that the world needs. We're not offering them heaven. We're not offering them immortality. But what we are offering them is a religion without hellfire. We're offering them a faith without irrationality. We're offering them love without conditions, without saying you have to believe the right things or I can't love you. By becoming a welcoming, inclusive community, and the foundation has been laid by everyone now participating in Quincy Church and everyone who has participated in the past. The foundations are there. Your church is one of the most self-directed congregations I've known. And I have been involved with many congregations over my lifetime. And the fact that Quincy operates so well with a quarter-time minister is kind of interesting, that so many things are simply taken care of without my even having to stick my fingers in anything. And I've been able to experiment with different forms of ministry while I'm being here, such as our Tuesday night check-in and our Thursday night discussion. And I want to do more of those kinds of things. And I want to bring us back to why I want to do more of those things. It's because the world, the United States, Quincy, needs progressive religion, and it needs to be visible and a distinctive voice within your community and within the world. I'm going to read from the article that Marianne read for us about progressive religion. What does religion offer that progressive need to make our movement work? First, there's nothing like it if you want to bond a bunch of very diverse people into a tight community of shared meaning and value. A religious congregation brings together people of all ages, backgrounds, educational levels, professional rank, and life circumstance, and melds them into an enduring tribe that's centered around a shared commitment to mutual trust and care, and most importantly, has a clear and vivid shared vision of the future they're trying to create. That's the invitation, that's the challenge. Keep that vision at the center of your lives. Dedicate yourself in some small way, whatever that small way is, to spreading the fruits of your progressive faith, of your liberal faith. I know that Georgia talks about, this is a simple thing, and I didn't ask Georgia if I could tell all of you this, but everyone in our Tuesday and Thursday nights has heard this story, that one day she went down to one of these mini pantries that are around Quincy, and there was a man standing there, and Georgia was bringing cat food to put in this pantry. And the man saw the cat food and began to cry. He said, "Oh, nobody's ever put cat food in here, and I really need cat food because I can't afford it for my animals." That's making a difference. That's taking a small act of kindness and compassion and using it to change one person's life. And if we all could just touch one person's life in the next week or month, we can begin to change the way the culture of Quincy is today, that in some ways is intimidating. I want to let you know, I was looking at the statistics of the most recent election. And despite the fact that Donald Trump won Adams County, there were still thousands of people. I've got the number right here. There are over 8,000 people that voted for the Democratic Party. There are 100 people that voted for the Green Party. And most shocking of all, there were 25 people who voted for a socialist party. I thought that was an interesting number. There's 25 people who at least think socialism is a good idea in Quincy and in Adams County. So there are more of us out there. There are what sometimes we call anonymous Unitarian Universalists, people who, if they knew we exist, would say, "This is where I've been looking for my whole life." When you hear the stories of people who've been attracted to Unitarian Universalists, that's a common theme. If I'd known sooner that a UU church existed in my community, I'd have joined years or decades ago. I have hope that even in a week like this, where we've seen the darkest and ugliest side of our nation, that there are people of compassion and justice everywhere. And that is our hope. So thank you all for being with me, for all that you give and do, and for coming together and supporting one another in this difficult time.